Okay, I think we'll get started. I'm actually quite excited about this session because I feel like most of the conversation today has culminated into where's an action plan, where's the priorities, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So my sense is that there's going to be nothing but violent applause for what's being said on this stage today. So with me, of course, is Dr. Rebecca Auer, who you've all met several times today, but she's joined by Dr. Stuart Edmonds, who is the Executive Vice President at the Canadian Cancer Society, where he oversees the research and advocacy team. And with me also is Natascha Kozlowski, who is the Executive Director with the Ontario Cancer Research Ethics Board, focused on streamlining research ethics reviews and collaborating across all areas of cancer research. So what this panel is intending to do in the next hour or so is quite important, as it will inform the workshop that will happen immediately following. And really, this distinguished group of folks is here to educate us on the Canadian Cancer Society transforming cancer clinical trials initiatives. Let me say that one more time. So the Canadian Cancer Society transforming cancer clinical trials initiative. Many of you in this room either are aware of it, you have participated in it, but it's an extraordinary piece of work that has been produced, and we're getting some insight today that has not yet been publicly shared, although many of you, as I said in this room, have been engaged in the process. So together we're going to educate on some of the core recommendations and activities that have been recommended as part of this report. We want to lay out some of the key implications of creating an action plan, thinking about how we move forward with this report, and really together, based on the nature of how this, the Canadian Cancer Society brought the community together, is to lay out a vision for change. So particularly both Stuart and Rebecca, as well as Dr. Janet Dancy, are at the helm on this initiative, and I know that Stuart and Rebecca will talk more about this, but it was folks like Natascha who also participated very prolifically in constructing some of the actions and providing directions. So what we'll do is each of Stuart and Rebecca and Natascha will talk for 10 minutes, and then we're going to have an open forum conversation where, please, we encourage you also to come up to the mic and ask any questions that you might have or make any comments as well. This is a very important report. So Stuart, with that said, I'm going to start with you.
Is it on now? Okay, good. Thank you, Anne-Marie. And before I start talking about the report and the action plan, it's not a CCS action plan. It's an action plan for Canada. So we've been the ones convening and drawing up the plan, and we'll work out to determine what our role is going to be in executing the plan. But really, it's a plan for Canada. As Anne-Marie suggested, one of the first things we realized as we were embarking on this journey to transform cancer clinical trials in Canada, really we understood that we needed to engage all stakeholders that are involved in cancer clinical trials, because we recognized that to understand what the issues were and really determine what the solutions were going to be, we needed all hands to the pump. Really, we needed everyone there to get their perspectives, but also we recognized it was the same organizations, individuals that are going to help us fix some of the issues too. We also set it up that we weren't going to diagnose the system. This is all about finding solutions, finding ways to treat the cancer clinical trial system. So our journey started with we had a group, a meeting with clinical trials experts across the country, and that really set the tone for a number of other consultations we had, either in person or virtual, with people with lived and living experience, Canadian provincial cancer agencies and their clinical trials units. We spoke to institutions where clinical trials are conducted through Healthcare Can. We spoke to cancer research funders in Canada through the Canadian Cancer Research Alliance, and we spoke to industry as well. So we really did get that 360 view of clinical trials in Canada. And really, we recognized also very early that we're not creating something new. And we've heard today, there are many amazing initiatives that are going on in the country that are solving some of the problems related to clinical trials. We really understood that our work was really about how we can pull them together, how we can leverage these really amazing initiatives. So from the consultations, the team at CCS, working very closely with Rebecca and Janet and others, formulated 7 priority areas that we wanted to focus on. And in those priority areas, there were over 30 action items. And within those 30 action items, we have over 130 ideas of what we can do to execute on those action items. So we have a really rich base to work from. To just go through the priority areas, and some of these areas we've already talked about today. It's somewhat heartening to hear that everyone appreciates these issues, and it was good to hear some of the solutions. And certainly in the last session, we heard some of the solutions that are actually already in play. So the first is really around ensuring that everyone has access to clinical trials, whether that's ensuring clinical trials are seen as care, or engaging underserved communities in clinical trials, engaging people with lived experience in clinical trials. The second is streamlining our regulatory and administrative processes. We've heard countless times already today about the need to really improve our process to initiate clinical trials. The third is around improving awareness of cancer clinical trials. We heard already today about how do we inform people of what clinical trials are, but also kind of debunk some of the myths around clinical trials. But then also have tools available for patients to understand what clinical trials are available for them to actually participate in. The fourth is around a workforce, making sure that we know we have a strained health workforce in Canada, but ensuring that clinical trials are embedded in any reforms that we build into that workforce, and training people across the country to conduct clinical trials. The fifth is around data. We heard in the last session about the need to really standardize data collection across the country, coordinate that data collection, maybe even build clinical trials data as part of EMRs that exist in Canada. The sixth is really about how we build Canada to be a real leader in clinical trials. We want Canada to be a compelling place for, say, industry to be able to conduct clinical trials, whether that's providing incentives for industry, or having government recognize the economic value of conducting clinical trials in Canada. And then also, as part of that piece, having an efficient drug approval process, because we need to actually have, that's part of making a compelling case for industry to conduct clinical trials here. And the seventh priority is around funding for clinical trials, whether that's per case funding or funding for infrastructure, to really to ensure that we can conduct these trials here. So that's, in a nutshell, that's the plan. As Anne-Marie suggested, we are going to publish this very, very soon. And we're already kind of working on what the next steps are in this process. You know, I mentioned that we have a really rich base of kind of ideas that we can start to think about how we implement, and we're looking at how we bring together the entire community to really help us start to implement this plan.
And I'd like to just have you elaborate on that for a moment, Stuart. I've heard CCS describe itself as the convener, not the owner of report, and maybe you can help the audience because there's a lot of multi-stakeholders here that can be helpful.
Yeah, so certainly to develop the plan, I think we have been the convener to bring the different stakeholders together, and I think as we start to look at the implementation of the plan, we'll be that convener again. I think at some point we need to maybe amend our role to be more of a steward of the plan, but that remains to be seen, what our ongoing role is. There's some aspects of the plan, as we are a funder of clinical trials in Canada, and we're a strong voice on behalf of patients. I think there's other roles that we can play in implementing the plan too, but I think I see our role as being more of a steward on the plan going forward.
Rebecca, do you want to take it to the next level? Talk about some of the actions.
So I think this report, and I've read it a few times, and I would say I sometimes feel a bit overwhelmed by it because it is very comprehensive, and every single one of these priorities and actions are important, but it feels overwhelming. I have to say, like, it just feels like there's so much to do. How are we ever going to get started? I was at a conference with some other VPRs across the country, and one of the other VPRs said, you know, I always hear you say research is care. It's just not that simple. I'm actually going to challenge that. I think it is that simple. And I think if we continue to believe that that is true, a lot of these things will happen because they are part of that philosophical and cultural change. So things like, you know, integrating clinical trials into our clinical care ecosystem becomes a lot easier if the phlebotomist at the lab understands that the research blood draw is care, and the radiation department or the radiology department understands that that MRI, the patient happens to be on a clinical trial, that's still part of care. The medical students who are training understand that clinical research is part of what they will be expected to do when they grow up and become doctors. So I think, you know, and those are just a few examples, but there are so many of them that I think if culturally we really do embrace that, if we truly believe that the best care we can provide patients has to include access to clinical trials. It doesn't mean that every patient does a trial. It doesn't mean that every trial is a positive study. It means that patients have access to trials. Then I think things do change. If I think about what are kind of the top things that we need to do, I do think that in this moment in time, an economic argument around clinical trials as an economic driver in this country. Again, some of the comments that have already been made. I mean, the healthcare sector is one of the single biggest employers. We have an opportunity to make decisions that show the value for certain new therapeutics, and yet we don't invest in studies that, for example, de-escalate and reduce the burden on our healthcare system, or ensure that we are providing, you know, the recommended or best care. So I think we have to make an argument that really focuses on health research, again, as an industry and an economic driver. And in order to do that, I would say the top three things are integrating clinical trials into our clinical care paradigm. And that does have to happen at many levels, at the hospital administration level, provincial government level, federal level, but even at the level of training Royal College physicians, nursing education, to really ensure that integration is maintained throughout the entire ecosystem. I think so integration, simplifying or having like I lost my word. Streamline, that was the word, streamlining that process. So there's so much redundancy in the system. I think what we need to do is become the place, and we're going to hear from Clinical Trials Australia tomorrow, but become the place where clinical trials get done efficiently, and that the barriers and the friction that, you know, Dr. Apte was talking about is reduced so that we can get clinical trials activated faster, we can get first patient on trials faster, and that's going to require some compromise. I think some of the things that Clinical Trials Ontario, for example, are doing around standardized contracts with industry, single REB. Wouldn't it be amazing if you could open a trial in one place with one budget and one set of contracts, and then like the just-in-time sort of vision, you could open that trial anywhere in the province, maybe even in the country, and use that same framework. And so I think if we could get to a place where some of these things are streamlined, that would be really powerful. And then investment. And it's, again, the investment is a strategic investment in clinical trial infrastructure that has clear deliverables for return on that investment, like bringing industry and clinical trials into the country, offering novel therapies to patients, and understanding the value of the care we provide now. You know, that care is research paradigm. You know, I remember pitching a clinical trial to Cancer Care Ontario years ago that potentially could save the Ontario government $1.8 million a year in low molecular weight heparin, and they were not interested because they don't fund research. So these types of, you know, pitching it in a very clear, you know, the economic argument. So when you invest in clinical trials, you're investing in a future return on that investment. Now, the return on that investment may not come directly back to clinical trials. It might come back with reducing a cost savings on the whole healthcare system. But I think the three things I would say we should focus on first.
Thank you. Stuart, remind me, 7 priorities, how many actions and how many ideas?
Over 30 action items, and I think it's over 130 ideas. Lots to do.
Yes, but it's concise, it's consolidated, and it gathers up much of the conversations that have actually filtered through this room today so that we can move forward as opposed to continuing to talk about the issues and the barriers. Yes?
Yeah, but I also think having that many action items and kind of ideas allows all stakeholders to have a role. They can all see themselves in the plan, because we know that the issues that we're experiencing are complex issues. You know, I've said before that if they were easy to fix, we'd have fixed them. They're complex issues, and there's not a simple one fix for these issues. And so it's going to take a number of different acts to be able to address many of the problems we're finding with the system.
Thank you. Natascha, would love to hear from you. And you're engaged from a different perspective in this report, and perhaps you can share that.
Hi, I'm Natascha. I'm from the research ethics side, which is the least loved part of clinical trials.
The hardest part.
The hardest part, yes. And so I was so thankful to be able to be involved in this initiative, and certainly to come today to be able to try to synthesize a little bit about how this action plan will eventually be seen in the future and how we can operationalize it. And I think it's really important to think about that the themes that are within the action plan and within the report, they're not new. They are reiterated, but by different people. So if you've been in the clinical trials world long enough, like myself, and you get to be of a certain vintage, you've seen a lot of these themes coming up. And really, it always comes back to REB, regulatory, and to many extents, I certainly agree. Let's think about Canada. We have close to 1,100 hospitals throughout the country. And if you think about the hospitals that are actually involved in research, they're the larger academic centers. And that worked really, really well 10, 15, 20 years ago, when your clinical trials were trying to recruit maybe 100, 500 participants. But now we're in the world of precision medicine. We're in the world of understanding that there might be only 1 or 2 participants at every hospital that might be eligible for one of these very important trials. And when you think that only 5% of cancer patients participate in clinical trials and 90% of clinical trials fail, it's really important that we change the current system that we have. Imagine a world where if you're able to open up a trial at any of the 1,100 or so hospitals in Canada and recruit just one participant into that trial, you would be able to answer many of the important questions that are part of that research study. So we actually are living in a very old model of clinical trials. And this action plan will allow us to reassess that and think about what we can do to shake it up a little bit. And I think there are areas that really need to be reimagined. And that's because over the past 20 years, institutions have been building up their own research infrastructure, the large academic centers. They have their own research ethics board because that is a requirement as a part of the Tri-Council policy statement as well as our regulations. I'm not saying that research ethic boards aren't important. They are. They're integral. We all know this. But we don't need to have each hospital's research ethics board reviewing a study. There is not a single research ethics board that will reject a study that will say it's not ethical, and then another ethics board will say this one's perfectly ethical. So having a single REB review will definitely streamline. And I come from a very specialized cancer research ethics board where we do streamline research. We have oversight for 30 of the hospitals in Ontario that conduct clinical trials, and we're able to streamline those reviews to be able to get studies out there faster. But there are other inefficiencies that we really need to think about, and that is in the regulatory space as well. And so if you think about that we can have one review at the regulatory side in Health Canada, why can't we have a single review nationally from an ethics perspective, and then allow the hospitals to be able to come on board? So when I looked at the report and saw the different themes, they'd acknowledged certainly that there's an increased complexity and increased cost to the studies. We need to increase our efficiencies. We need a central research ethics board, and we need to have that almost hand in glove with the regulatory reviews. One of the reasons that is hard to disentangle all of the infrastructure at the hospitals is because we are very risk averse. It's also perhaps not understanding or different interpretations of the regulations, the privacy laws that we have to consider when we're doing reviews. And so really we need to think about how we can create a national REB system, one review, one time. And then need to certainly think about how this would work. There are complexities within cancer care, and that really has to do with standard of care as well. And I don't have the solution for that. But standards of care are different across the country. And so that's one of the biggest elements when an ethics board looks at a clinical trial, is to try to determine whether or not the standard of care is the correct one to be used in the study design. And so I think there are lots of things within the clinical trials action plan and in the report that we're going to be able to think about how can we reimagine the system, how can we move it forward, and more importantly, I'm hearing the themes that we've heard all these years coming from participants, coming from patient advocates, coming from all these different groups. It's no longer just the people that are working within the clinical trial system that are saying something, that almost shouting it into the void. We're hearing this echoed from other people within different organizations across the country, and that's what makes this report so exciting.
Thank you for that. We welcome all questions, so please, if you have any about the report, about the work that's been done, come on up to the mic. I'll perhaps kick off with the first question here, and really because this was such a comprehensive process with the consultation reach out, quite extraordinary, I have to say, congratulations on that, is what I think would be helpful is to get a little bit more color commentary on descriptions like what is a national clinical trial system? Like what are the key components of that? It's come up on a couple of the polling questions that we had as being a top priority. It's one of the first or second things that people want to see change. So what generally were people saying in terms of the constitution of something like that? Just can you paint us a bit of a picture?
I can start. I think
I realize it's a big question. It's
it
really
is a big
just
question. Thank you.
just to get a high-level key components to get people started in their thinking.
I think it's part of it is what I alluded to before, in that we have, I think as Monique Bejan said, we're a country of pilot projects. I think it's continued now. We have a lot of really incredible initiatives in clinical trials. UACT was announced recently in Ontario, and we have CAN Review as well. We have amazing pilot projects that just either don't take off or don't get scaled across the country. And I think it's almost like we have a machine with parts that aren't actually connecting to one another. And I think we just need to, we can just do a better job if we can actually connect all the pieces together and leverage all these initiatives across the country. I think that would improve, that would create the system to start with, and then we can start improving on that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Is that there's some great initiatives and great ideas, but they aren't national, and so again, and I don't understand what are the sticks or the carrots that are needed to sort of say this isn't your choice anymore for your small local community hospital to have its own REB, and you know what I mean, like something that really this is how we're going to run clinical trials, and this is the central REB that is going to be used. This is the contracts that are going to be used. This is the price list, and Canada's open for business. If we could get there, and I know it's going to take some compromise from institutes and administrators, but that's where I think we need to go. We need to all buy into that vision. And then a lot of these other things I think will follow. They will fix themselves. The more clinical trials we have in the ecosystem, the easier it is to run those clinical trials, to answer those important questions. Then a lot of the sort of culture around clinical trials is going to change, just because it won't be 5%. Maybe it'll be 25 or 30 or 50. Mm-hmm. And it'll be something that the patients just, it's part of what we do. It's part of what nurses do. It's part of what pharmacologists do. But I'm not sure what's the inertia to get there? What's the carrot or the stick to make hospitals and administrators say, I will sign on to this?
And I invite the audience to participate in this dialogue as well, because it feels like there is a lot of amazing puzzle pieces. We had 3 incredible case studies not an hour ago that made significant step changes that were demonstrations of moving forward, but the inertia in the system, or where in the system exactly is it and what needs to happen? I certainly don't have the answer to that, but is there thoughts or opinions from the audience, people who would like to stand up? And thank you, Natascha, for that.
Yeah, what you're describing right now, for me, at least from the industry perspective, sounds a lot like a change management process, where when there is a significant, let's say, disruption or change within a company, the usual process is to assign champions within the company to basically sell the idea of the change, why it works, and all the positives about it. But it also has to start from the top and go all the way down, and then from the down all the way back to the top. If we can implement that, but on the national, interprovincial levels, somehow, maybe by creating some kind of a temporary unit, I don't know what to call it, but a team, let's say, to instigate that change process, I think that could be like the machine that can make it happen. Just an idea, but just from my experience, I've been through many different kinds of companies, from small to very large, with different scenarios of change, and usually the process is the same, and the result is that eventually people buy in to that change, because change is scary as well. And a lot of people will say, well, on a day-to-day basis, this is what I'm doing, this is what I know, don't bother me with anything else, right? And that's usually the first gut reaction that they have towards any kind of change. But if you have a system in place that kind of propels people forward, I think that's what can help. Just my idea.
Thank you for your thoughts.
Hi, my name's Anu Shukla-Jones. I'm from BioCanRx. I'm really curious about what your plan looks like, because from the description, it sounds like things that I've encountered in previous lifetimes of jobs. And what typically I've seen happen is some parts of the organization have a dozen things that they have to do, and some parts only have 3, and prioritization gets out of whack. And when that happens, everything stalls. And then it becomes personality-dependent decisions. And then it becomes less about the actual project and the mission and about a power struggle. And so I would strongly encourage that as this plan gets implemented, that there's a lot of consideration given to things that Michelle, Louise, and I have been scribbling about, which is leadership, courage, and humility. It takes a lot of it, and it looks different in times of change, much to your point for change management, and especially in a distributed system where there are many, many, many leaders with competing priorities. My hesitancy about and my reluctance about buying into big national programs is also around the parts of the system that change that are on the peripheries. I come from the translational research space, so as I think about this, and I think about our program, and how is our program going to be impacted, and what needs to happen in order to support the system, but also to support the other part, which is the economic side. And so I think we can't lose sight of the interdependencies across the other systems. I love that education's included. My first question around clinical trials is always, how are you going to implement this into the practice of medicine? Because that doesn't seem to change very quickly. And so I encourage you, leaders, as you're implementing, that you think about what those intersections are, the dependencies, and whose voices haven't been included. Because I bet there's some of those as well. Thank you.
Thank you. It struck me is I've had the privilege of working with a group that is developing a national women's health strategy, and you can imagine that has complexities similarly as well. And what they have done quite extraordinarily is, as CCS has done in rallying the community, but then they took the next step was to say, you're on first, you're on second, you get this job, you get this job. It became classic project management, but it was based on the fact that everybody wanted the same thing. And then there was high-level sponsorship at government to be able to drive forward on that.
Yeah, so a quick comment and then a question. So I do believe very much what Vatch was saying, that that the change starts at the top. And essentially all you have to do is to convince the head of every research institute in the country, every hospital, to come on board, right? And it'll start to trickle down, hopefully. So that's a very simple job, I'm sure. The second part that I really was curious about is the difference between academic trials and the big registry trials, these international trials. And how, we've heard a little bit of talk today about the impact on the whole ecosystem, the economy and so forth, how that plays a role or might play a role in affecting change in Canada. So I somehow feel that the academic trials would be the easy part. I'm not quite sure about that, but I might be wrong. But how do you see the impact on these big registry trials? We see, for example, in Quebec, one of the big pulls is the fact that we're able to, in some cases, whether it's through Catalyst or through QCRO, accelerate the starting of clinical trials in Quebec. So time seems to be a factor, time to recruit and so forth, or time to get the trial started. So do you see a difference between the big registry trials and the academic trials in terms of the approach from the report or draft report?
So I'm not sure I can answer that question about registry trials and academic trials, but certainly in terms of academic trials versus industry trials, I think there are there may be some differences, positives or negatives, that academic trials we may be able to move those forward in some areas faster, and industry trials some areas faster as well. In terms of registry trials, my sense is we don't do many registry trials, and I think that there's when we talk about the research is care and care is research, that second piece, I think there's more we can do to really understand kind of how practice, what happens when actual new interventions are actually being prescribed, and the impact of that. I think we need to do more in that space.
Anybody else?
Same thing, I'm just in terms of academic versus industry trials, and I think we're all very well aware of this, that it's the industry trials that fund the academic trials. And so we absolutely need to have both. And I think, the sort of large registry trials have actually a different why, if you will, compared to maybe these earlier phase trials that are getting novel therapeutics, Canadian patients access to novel therapeutics, or even those phase 4 trials. So I think those two types of trials have very different whys, but a lot of the process improvements that we need to find to be able to run those, that it doesn't matter what the why is, the how is the same, if you will. And so I think depending on what stakeholders you're talking about, the why may be very different, but what we need to do to achieve this efficiency and bring more trials into our country, I think it's the same, actually.
I actually just wanted to bring back Vachi for a little bit, because he's a CRO. How do you see this impacting, your clinical research organizations in the country? If there's a change in the way clinical trials are done, does that impact CROs?
I think, we look at the bottom line of things, right? As a business, we want to make sure that we are attracting a lot of studies to this country. It was a bit alarming in the past, let's say 5 to 6 years, right before COVID and shortly after the pandemic kind of died down, to see the number of trials decreasing instead of increasing in Canada, despite the efforts that we've been making with CTO, with Catalyst, and the streamlined IRB process, for example. There still seems to be a lot of negative views out there, and when I say out there, it's really internationally. I go to conferences in Europe, in the US, and a lot of the clients I speak to still say, why should I choose Canada? You guys are still very slow, or you guys are still very complex, and it just, we waste a lot of time in Canada. So when I hear that, I correct them right away, of course. I give them the metrics that I know of, at least, to convince them that, no, that's probably old data that you had, and right now we're doing better. It's not the best, but we're doing better. For us as a CRO, the more we attract, the better the landscape is in terms of the efficiencies that we implement in the country. And not only the efficiencies, but again, it's the smooth process. People want to see a smooth process along the lines of the provinces and nationally. And if we see that, and if we can show that, and that's the other thing, we just don't have enough metrics sometimes to show it in certain areas. Again, and I applaud again CTO and Catalyst, because they have been running on metrics for a while now, and they're showing with their own reports what's happening, and that's good because we can take that and convince people. But we need more of that as well. So the more we have to show that we're getting better and we're improving as a CRO, we can make that case to clients outside of Canada to bring their trials here. And again, with a current political era and situation we're in, it is definitely an opportunity for us to shine. It could take some time, but yesterday was when we had to start. But I'm also happy to see this, right? We are doing these kind of conferences where we're now coming together and speaking about it. I was at the Myeloma Canada Phase 0 project workshops that we did as well. Those were amazing, and things are being done there as well. So we just need to keep that momentum going. One thing I would love to also just see, I'm taking a few more seconds of the time here, because I wanted to mention it before and I forgot. One of the players, and we kept on saying this before, but one of the important players in all of this is government, and it would be great in maybe future conferences or similar meetings to have them invited to these meetings as well. Certain people that have enough leeway or say to do something within the government as well, and for them to also be educated and see how important this is for the industry and in general the population for Canada. So if we can do that as well, that's part of the change process, right? We need to also inform them so that we can quickly get them involved when the discussions happen.
On that point, Stuart, Rebecca, was there government engagement in the process?
Yes. So we did have Health Canada was engaged in our first workshop, and we've had CHR engaged as well later on. So government was engaged, but also, as Rebecca showed, we have a cancer caucus, the Federal Cancer Caucus, that actually was also part of the workshop, the first workshop we held.
Last year here we had ISED, and we had CHR. Megan Beadle, I think, was here last year. So, yeah, no, but I think it's a really important point, and like ongoing continued engagement.
Yeah, ACT was here last year, so we have attempted many times, Barry, you may want to comment on this, to bring regulatory, over the years regulators have been here, and key folks of that.
We actually have had both Health Canada and Division 8, Division 5 on numerous times, presenting here. So, but I think that really it's the political side, which you have approached last time, and we actually crossed paths with some of them when I was approaching them on the molecular profiling networking in the country. So I do somehow feel that even more so than the Health Canada and the bureaucratic side, it's the politicians who will motivate this because they'll control the budget.
And I wanted to also mention, it's great that representatives from government, from the health side of government, were represented or are continuing to be represented in these events, or at least discussions. But for example, you had, I think Barry, was you who mentioned, or someone else mentioned before, there's also the Minister of Economy and Innovation, for example, right? And as CROs, we often go to them as well and have discussions with them as well. I know Bio-Quebec does. I know Innovative Medicines Canada does. So there's certain different departments of government that sometimes they don't talk to each other, but on certain issues they need to talk to each other also. So just the health part is important, just the health part, but also the economic and innovation side of government should be speaking together, but they need to both know what's going on.
Yeah, thank you for raising that. Ritu Banjari, who was ADM at ISED, was a keynote last year, really talking about the vibrancy and a need to build a vibrant life science sector. I think she's changed portfolios now, but that's part of the problem, isn't it?
But I think, and I don't know, Louise, if you want to talk to this, but I think one of the advantages of having a national strategy, and I really think we need one voice, one plan, one advocacy effort, because I think to your point, I mean, I've been banging on, politicians' doors too, and I'm saying something similar to Barry, but not exactly the same. And then, like, it's too fragmented. I've actually had, I've done with BioCanRx, we did a day on the Hill, which was a fantastic learning experience. But one of the senators said to me, "Where's CCS? Why aren't they here?" As if, like, why are you here alone? You should be here with CCS. Where are the universities? Why aren't they here with you? So, it's easy enough to say, well, you're just one small part of the story, but it's not if we go together. And so I really think this is an amazing first step. And I think we all need to own this. we need to make some compromises. We can't do everything. We have to decide how to prioritize this, and we have to put some solutions in front of them. But if we keep going each on our own, we're never going to make this happen.
Okay. I think we're going to move into the workshop unless there is any other comments or thoughts that people want to bring to the table.
Point. I think the gentleman over there talked about data, and I think one of the things that as we were going through the consultations, we realized we didn't have a lot of data to really report back on the health of the cancer clinical trial system. So it's certainly one of the actions in the plan is to actually understand what data gaps there are and try to collect different better data, but to be able to report on the health of the cancer clinical trial system is really, really important to show that we're making progress.
Thank you.
So one of the elements, and we talked a lot about today about asking why. So when you go back to your institutions, I want you to ask why you do things a certain way and why it can't be done a different way. We've been doing the same thing the same way for 20 years. Pharma has a study. They have to find a site that will run their study. Contracts have to be signed with pharma, and then it is reviewed by a research ethics board. Why can't pharma just open the study? Why can't they do an application to a central REB, and then centers and sites can say, hey, that looks like an amazing clinical trial. I would love to be involved in that. We don't have a way to know what studies are open in Canada. We don't have a unified way to see what's available to participants. We have some navigation, we have some central REBs, we have a wide variety of people that know something. Go back to your institution. If you see something that you don't like the way it's being done, think if there's a better way that can be done for it. And then when you get the report, you'll be able to see the priorities and how they can tie into your own work and the work that we all do.
Thank you for that. And I wanted to, Dr. Brian Cantor will be speaking tomorrow. He's coming to us from Duke Margolis in the U.S. to talk about exactly the subject on data. So we're looking forward to that, Brian.
Hi. My name is Bruce Groves, and I'm retired and a former business guy and working in the pharmaceutical industry, animal health to be exact. I think about what you're saying today or talking about today in clinical trials, and I always think about, have you ever thought about a lobby group called the Canadian Association of Clinical Trials? You'd be a member, and the universities, anybody doing clinical trials could be a member of this group. And there would be a lobby group to solve some of the issues that you're doing, getting clinical trials done ethically or done through government or whatever. And it would be an association that the various companies would have to, or various institutions would be a member of, various CRO organizations would be a member of, and it would be a group that comes together. It's like a lobby group. But they listen and they work on the same problem. The problem is, how do you get clinical trials done? And efficiently and ethically. And that would be a major change, but it would take, the money would come from the organizations such as the Ottawa Hospital or the St. Margaret's Hospital Institute, but it would be a group focusing on only clinical trials. So anyway, that's an idea from an old-timer to just thinking back what we used to do in getting things done through lobby groups. It's no different than unions or whatever, but it's not a union. It's the goal is to get clinical trials done.
Yeah, so there is one that already it does exist called Innovative Medicines Canada. We're a member of it as a CRO. There's also many pharmas that are members, and it's not the only thing they do is not clinical trials, but it is part of their mandate to lobby for clinical trials. So that's why I mentioned them before. Locally here in Quebec, because that IMC is on a federal level, but locally in Quebec, we have a lobby group called Bio-Quebec as well, I'm very happy to say the membership has grown significantly over the past 4 or 5 years as well. And there is a working group in Bio-Quebec for clinical research for this province as well. So there are already certain organizations that are doing work, but again, it's a matter of bringing them together, either again provincially and federally together, to move forward certain initiatives. But they could be great tools, and I use that word lightly, but great tools to pull in the government as well, because that's what they're there for. They're to lobby the government also.
So
Maybe
just
that
before you
becomes
go,
idea number 131.
yeah,
Yeah.
Just before we go to the workshop, to let you know that IMC is represented here. Olivier may have stepped out right now, but he'll be back tomorrow, Olivier Jerome. And there is actually identified on their website a report showing that, why it's important to invest in clinical trials and the economic benefit for that. But he'll be around probably tomorrow if you want to speak to him. Thanks.